I thank the gentleman from Georgia, and since we're talking about the rule of law, I will not regale the stories of my misspent youth at St. Patrick's Day in his fair city of Savannah, but I will say that my friend from Louisiana was talking about earlier the importance of the rule of law, and we were talking about the context of criminals being let out prematurely, not giving them the ability to actually come to a place where they can, again, interact with society. And we can talk about the mix with mind-altering drugs. We can talk about the misdiagnosis. We can talk about all of the things that we can and should do better. And I know that my friend from Louisiana, a devout Catholic, a devout believer in the healing power and the grace of our Savior, I know that he, like I, believe in the power of forgiveness and being able to work to rehabilitate, and that we're called to do that. But that is not an excuse for irresponsibly, programmatically, and politically putting individuals on the street who have no business being there. And in that same vein, I know that my friend from Louisiana is a staunch believer in a secure border, as most Americans are. And I wanted to just make a couple of points and see what the gentleman thinks. That when you look at the damage that was being done by the previous administration, not as most people think, by just ignoring the border and letting people get in, but rather encouraging and purposefully pulling people into the United States by virtue of the misapplication, misinterpretation, and straight out disregard of the law to abuse our compassionate parole and asylum policies meant and reserved for those in dire need of protection from political persecution and other areas defined in the law for special purposes. You might be granted parole to care for a sick loved one legally in the United States. You might be granted some specific purpose for that one individual because we're a compassionate nation. But our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, led by the previous president, led by the previous secretary, led by the previous vice president, purposely bastardized the law for political purposes, endangering children, raped on the journey, used this human chattel callously for political purposes, flooding our communities with criminals from other countries. And now the President of the United States, who ran on reversing that, is doing so. And President Trump, and Stephen Miller, and Tom Homan, Secretary Noem, the brave men and women of ICE, the brave men and women of Border Patrol, all of our law enforcement should be roundly commended for doing their job. And I can tell you the relief of those great men and women to have a president and a secretary that has their back and that believes in them and has allowed them to carry out their mission under the law, rather than accusing them of whipping someone they fully knew did not happen. It is a new day in America where the flow across the border is statistically zero, as it should be, compared to the millions that flowed in for the 4 years under Joe Biden. And now, the Trump administration has, to the best of my understanding, arrested some 359,000 individuals for removal in the first 7 months of this administration. of 47. 70% of whom had pending criminal charges or convictions, contrary to the allegations of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Why are our colleagues on the other side of the aisle protesting the removal of murderers, sex offenders, drug traffickers, child abusers, gun criminals, gang members, threatening our communities, killing our citizens like Jocelyn Dungare or Rachel Marin, Laken Riley? And to the other 30%, they're illegal aliens who broke our immigration laws. They literally broke our laws. And I know that the gentleman from Louisiana feels so strongly that we should back up our law enforcement community that he raised a privileged matter on the floor of the House involving one of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who has been indicted for interfering with law enforcement. And not just interfering with law enforcement, interfering with ICE. Law enforcement personnel, which she is charged with overseeing in her service on the Homeland Security Committee. I know the gentleman rightfully brought that matter before the House. We will continue to address that matter in the future. But I wonder if the gentleman could speak to the importance of this body and our leaders of this country, the 435 people in this chamber, the 100 on the other side of the building, the president and the people that report to him, the judges in the Supreme Court and through our courts throughout the country, the importance of enforcing the law, of standing alongside, not blindly, but standing alongside our law enforcement community to protect the rule of law that he so artfully described with respect to our jails and the enforcement of our laws in our communities, but also to enforce our border in concert with local law enforcement, and how important it is that we stand alongside them, that we stand up and hold ourselves accountable for doing that work and the proper oversight and the proper leadership to secure our nation. I yield, my friend from Louisiana.